Press the bell icon on the YouTube app to never miss a video from Newslaundry.
Welcome to Newslaundry Chhota Hafta. For the full episode, subscribe because it is behind the paywall and only subscribers get access to uncut, complete content. Newslaundry Hafta is our weekly wrap of all that made the news, all that didn't, and all that should have and all that shouldn't have. We agree, we disagree, we critique, and occasionally we beat each other up. But it's all good fun. Subscribe.
This is a Newslaundry podcast and you're listening to NL Hafta.
अंग्रेज अपना लगान और न्यूज़ लॉन्ड्री अपना हफ्ता कभी नहीं छोड़ते. Welcome to another episode of Hafta. We bring you the Hafta from a pretty deserted office. Like most people in the country, I hope most people in the country, we are also working from home. We've just come here for this recording and I guess to figure how we're going to plan the next few months. Before I go over the headlines, which is going to be predominantly about the coronavirus, let me introduce our panel to you. With me in office are Manisha, Pande and Mehraj. I hope you guys are completely clear of any viruses.
Hello.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, only can say that.
We'll find out.
Only God will.
Joining us on the phone line is Suhasini Haider. Many of you who are listeners to this podcast know her well. She is the diplomatic editor for The Hindu. She writes on foreign policy. Before this, she was foreign affairs editor and she had a primetime show on CNN IBN. She had Worldview with Suhasini Haider and she has received several journalism awards, including the Prem Bhatia Award, and was part of the CNN team that won the Columbia DuPont Broadcast Journalism Award. Welcome, Suhasini. I hope you're well.
Thanks so much, and thank you for doing this over what might be a faulty line, but at least we are doing the social distancing thing.
Yes, and I think so far your intro was quite clear. We heard you loud and clear. Also joining us, importantly at a time like this, is Dr. Arjun Dang. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Dr. Dang's lab in Delhi. He has completed his MBBS and MD in pathology and also done a clinical fellowship in liver pathology from King's College Hospital, London. With a special interest in the field of oncology, he's done extensive work in the triple-negative breast carcinoma. I hope I pronounced that correctly, but I'm sure the doctor will correct me. And also has publications on medullary carcinoma. Carcinoma, okay. And has done various presentations related to primary adenocarcinoma of lung and dedifferentiate. Okay, these are words I can't pronounce. Dr. Dang, welcome.
That's all right.
And also, I just found out actually that he's also Dr. Dang from the lab where I have been getting tested ever since I developed diabetes. So welcome.
Thank you, Abhinandan. Thank you for that brief introduction. And I excuse all your pronunciations because definitely that's not your field of expertise and I completely understand. And thank you for having me on the podcast.
Right. So let me just start off with what made the headlines this week and then we will get into the discussion. As expected, across the world, COVID-19 is making headlines. It is changing our life like nothing ever has, at least in my lifetime. If Madhu was here, she'd tell me if she has experienced something like that in hers, but she told me that she hasn't yesterday while I was speaking with her. There have been, India has crossed 200 cases. 14 people have been discharged and recovered. We have recorded 5 deaths so far. Meanwhile, Italy has bypassed China in the number of deaths. The WHO suggests testing every suspected case. India adopts a different approach. Maybe Dr. Dang can tell us a little bit about why that is. Maharashtra came up with this stamping mechanism. We'll talk a little bit about that in detail. T3, our international airport, saw some rather ruckus scenes which were disturbing, but I guess at times like this, a little bit of this can be expected. Let's see how that gets handled. Apparently, we are ramping up testing mechanisms. In Kolkata, a man fell ill after a drinking cow urine party, which was organized, and a BJP leader who organized has been arrested.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, as we speak, Kamal Nath has resigned, I believe.
Yeah, he's resigned.
So he clearly will not pass the floor test.
Yeah, and BJP apparently has the numbers. They have about 106 and the majority mark is 104.
Because 16 have resigned. So the amount of MLAs has come down.
22 INC rebels resigned
he
last
wouldn't
night.
have resigned if he had the numbers, that's clear.
And former Chief Justice of India, Ranjan Gogoi, was sworn in as a member of parliament among chants of shame, shame. The Telegraph newspaper, based out of Bengal, has received a press council notice for a headline that they did, which we shall talk about in a little more detail. And this morning, all four rapists and murderers of Jyoti Singh in Delhi were hanged at Tihar after 7 years since they committed the crime. The government has sought the call data records. Cellular operators have red flagged the surveillance state that we're in. Meanwhile, the Yes Bank crisis seems to have been resolved for now, and the moratorium of cash withdrawals is over. If we have time, we'll talk about that, but we'll focus on the more pressing matters. Meanwhile, the Delhi High Court has ordered DNA test of the bodies found after Delhi violence. We have a report on all the bodies that are found in drains. You can check out a really comprehensive report that Newslaundry has done on this, which Ayush and Basant have worked on, right? And it took them a long time to do that. I highly recommend you watch that report. And it is because we are funded by subscribers that we can do such reports. So may I please request you to pay to keep news free, because when the public pays, the public is served. When advertisers pay, advertisers are served. So let me get straight into COVID first. Dr. Dang, two specific questions. Yes. One, why is India, doing this testing regime? Like while many international commentators are saying every suspect case should be tested, here we are saying only those who have a travel history or have come in direct contact with someone who has been diagnosed. Is it because of a lack of machines? And does that actually solve the problem? Or will there be a lot of undetected cases amongst us and we should be very worried?
Sure. So, Abhinandan, thanks for the very, very relevant question that the citizens of India all of them are asking and also need to understand. So I will start with a quick overview of the stages of any particular pandemic. Like all of us understand, pandemic is an infectious disease that travels over the globe and has multiple countries that are affected by it. So when we talk about the stages or the levels or the categories of any particular pandemic, it starts with stage 1. That is the first stage to start with. So the first stage is an imported stage, where what I can actually explain is that initially, as all of you know, when COVID-19 hit India, it was the imported cases. That is the foreigners or the people who had gone abroad and were returning to the country with the infection. So that was stage 1. Then it went to stage 2 that we are currently in. That is the localized or the cluster infections. Now that would indicate like the family in Agra or the big group of people from Italy who were all tested positive. That was the cluster or the localized stage. Now the stage 3, that is the community stage, and stage 4, that's the epidemic stage. Some people also call them 3 and 4 under one umbrella of the community spread. And as you must have been reading about it, community spread is the stage that is actually extremely dangerous. So what community spread means, and where we aren't right now, and may God forbid that we reach it, is that asymptomatic people, that is people who don't have any fever and cough, will also test for positive for the COVID-19. So the protocols that have been laid down by the WHO and the CDC clearly indicate that in stage 2 of the infection, the testing criteria that is to be followed is what you've just mentioned, and I'll just elaborate on it. That is anyone who has symptoms of COVID-19 along with a history of travel to the affected areas, or with history of contact with someone who's a diagnosed case of COVID-19 is only to be tested. But as I say that, the ICMR is also monitoring whether India is in the community stage, and they've done random sampling of around 100 people who didn't have any symptoms or any COVID-19 like symptoms. And luckily, all of them fortunately have tested negative. So they have confirmed that we are not in stage 3, and in stage 2, the current testing criteria that is being followed is the correct thing to do. Apart from this, also you did mention a lack of testing capacity in the country versus the huge population that we have. I would completely agree with you that judicious testing is the need of the hour, and moving forward also, as long as we are in stage 2, we should stick to this criteria.
Okay, I just had one more question, and I understand, I mean, you're a doctor, you have to do doctory and not necessarily take on, just be campaigning and asking the government questions, which is our job actually. But a few days ago, we were discussing in office that I know for a fact, because a doctor told me that they had testing kits available, but the government had not allowed them to use it. So if you can tell us, I mean, understand if you can't talk about it, why?
No, I will definitely talk about this, because what you're saying from a layperson's point of view, if I was in your place, I'd be asking the same question. And it is a very logical apprehension and a question that you have here. Now, it is not as black and white as you are mentioning it. Now, every test is run by a particular set of reagents or kit. But with COVID-19, the particular strain of the virus that has been found to be positive in India is of a particular type. Now, the test that is being done by the various government institutes and also the mother lab, that is NIV in Pune, is testing for a particular strain that has been found to be present in India. To maintain uniformity and the quality of the tests being done by every private player, that is, if the government allows us in the coming few days, the kits that are being used has to be approved by NIV Pune, so that we are not getting erratic false positives and false negatives everywhere in every city, because that will lead to further chaos and panic. So even if the kits are available, the machines are ready, the trained manpower and infrastructure is present, the validation of the kits is a very essential step that the government needs to guide us about, and also laying down the SOP, that is the standard operating procedure, and the safety norms also need to be clearly indicated to the private laboratories testing for the particular COVID, because we want to benefit the nation with our services. And if this is not done in a controlled and regulated manner, mark my words, if the testing is not done in a controlled and regulated manner, we will actually go from the frying pan to the fire. And it will no way help in actually detecting cases if not done in the correct way.
So you're saying there's a scientific reason and it's not a PR exercise, basically.
1000% I would agree with the government. And also right now the validation procedure is going on in NIV Pune, and we are getting regular updates, and there are multiple vendors who kits are in queue, and as soon as any of the vendors get their kits approved and NIV stamps it as regulated and the private labs can start using it, then there are multiple private labs who are very well equipped to do the test. Also, Abhinandan, what you should keep in mind here, it's not just about putting the test here. It has a pre-analytical and a post-analytical phase in it that is extremely crucial. The pre-analytical meaning the person who's collecting the sample also has to have all the safety norms in place, because this is such a contagious and virulent virus that it can travel to healthcare professionals at a very fast rate, because they are exposed at very short distances from the patient. And also post-analytically, that is, once you run the sample, how are you discarding the samples? That's also extremely important. So for you to understand, testing is just a small piece of the puzzle. We have to look at the entire scenario and put our best foot forward.
Right, thanks. Suhasini, now if I could just come to you, there is, I mean, of course, you could weigh in on how you think this has been covered by the media. One specific thing on the foreign, since you are also an area expert in foreign relations, you know, I don't know whether you saw Donald Trump's press conference where he referred to it as the Chinese flu. Now, I dislike Donald Trump. I know many people do. And, you know, people thought it was xenophobic. And of course, when he says it, I'm sure there is a certain tongue-in-cheek, you know, he likes to be provocative. But if the Spanish flu could be called the Spanish flu, are there any, you know, foreign relation impact of this? And in your view, you think the coverage of it, and especially how the governments have reacted in India, is at par with how they've reacted in other parts of the world?
Start with that last part, because it comes directly from where Dr. Dang was speaking. You know, in terms of what the government decided to do was clearly not to go the route of many other countries like South Korea, Japan, where they said test, test, test. Instead, they are trying to isolate India in a sense and make sure that nobody with the virus gets in, or as few as possible get in. So what are the things that the government actually did? And then you can judge them. You know, over time, we will all know what worked and what didn't. But the government, first of all, has cancelled the visas of all foreigners, so that if you want to come to India, you have to get a special visa. This includes OCIs. You know, overseas citizens of India can no longer come on the basis of their OCI, even though it was a lifelong sort of passport given to them, a lifelong visa given to them. So they stopped the foreigners from coming in. The second phase was really to stop flights from countries that saw high rate of the epidemic. And then the third has been what we've seen in the last couple of days, which is to even stop passengers. They've already stopped passengers of any kind, Indians or foreigners, from about 37 countries. And as of this weekend, as of Sunday, what we're going to see is actually all of them, all the flights completely stop until the end of the month. So you're seeing that the government is really trying to isolate India. Now, does this work? Is this going to be the best way to do it? Do we still need to test inside India? And are we getting the full picture? Those are questions that remain to be answered. But remember that India has been unique in this. Today, the United States, for example, has put in a new travel advisory, level 4, saying that really we're going to stop anyone from coming into the US, but saying very particularly all American citizens need to come home. India is not doing that. India is saying all Indian citizens, everyone else who wants to come to India, don't come. Stay put where you are. It's causing a lot of hardships. There are businessmen stuck in cities around the world. There are Indian students who've been locked out of their own colleges, who have really nowhere to go, but have been told by the government, we can't take you back right now.
What is the status of these people? Because I had some relatives who were at the London airport and they were told that you can't go. Although they're Indian citizens, they had just gone there to visit their daughter. And their concern was like, while they can stay there,
they just have 2 days in order to try and get permission from the government to come. But actually, if you're in the UK, you're in one of 37 countries. That includes all of Europe. It includes the EU FTA partners, Switzerland, Norway, I think Liechtenstein as well. So you would not be able to, you would not actually be able to travel to India at this time unless you get some very special dispensation, which is unlikely. And so you really have to make your own way. The Indian embassies are trying to help. I know in many capitals, the Indian embassy has got subsidized accommodation for people. But this is, again, a different problem. In places like Manila, I think in parts of Southeast Asia, hotels are no longer taking guests.
Right.
So you really have to get a lot of help in order to do this. For the moment, those people are stuck. And I think unless they can come back by the 22nd, certainly until the 29th, there are no flights that are going to come in. And this is causing a lot of heartburn. We heard from one Indian who literally put out a video today on Twitter saying, help me, I'm an Indian, let me come home. My family needs me back. I can't stay. We spoke to another person who was similarly locked out, was an OCI, but was locked out and essentially needs his medication, which he doesn't have access to in another country. So it's causing some problems. We have spoken to the Ministry of External Affairs. We spoke to the government about these cases. And they're basically saying, look, we have to look at the greater good. We have to try and ensure that people don't come in and then spread the virus inside India. Their own loved ones would actually be much worse off if they were to come back with the virus in any way. So this is a choice India has made. When you look at those in Iran and Italy, two of the countries worst hit apart from China, what India did was essentially stop flights from there, stop people coming on flights from there, and then actually sent out teams to test people in Iran and Italy. Now, there are hundreds of people over there. So obviously, this is taking time. It's been a couple of weeks.
Right.
But this is the course the government has decided. Very quickly on the point about Mr. Trump and what he said, there is a basic logic for why you don't use the origins of a place as the name of a virus, even if you use it colloquially. And that is because there might be more than one virus coming out of that place. So you'd have to, give it maybe 1, 2, 3, that sort of name. And that's why they don't name it. I think when Mr. Trump is speaking about the Chinese virus, as he calls it, there is a political angle to it, because if you notice, Mr. Trump also brought out a campaign a pamphlet straight after he used the term Chinese virus and said, what are the Democratic contenders doing? What is Mr. Biden doing? He is actually pro-China. So this is part of the election campaign in the US, this usage of the word, particularly at a time when it does look like the government in the US was caught napping and came late into the game, if you like, in terms of countering the coronavirus. They were actually playing down the threat from the coronavirus. And now you're looking at about 10,000 cases there.
So we'll discuss the political angle a little more. Dr. Dang has to leave us because I'm sure he has more important stuff to do. But before you go, Manisha, Mehraj, you have any other questions before Dr. Dang leaves us with a recommendation
Yeah. Dr. Dang, you were talking
Yes.
about testing capacity. Right now, government has
Yes.
decided on a course. So what I want to know is if it needs to be scaled up massively, and it looks like it is gonna have to be. So does that
Yes.
capacity exist? Like if right now the numbers the BBC has put out is they'll be doing around 8,000 tests a day. In a country like India, I mean, if it spreads, let's hope it doesn't. But if it spreads, 8,000 tests a day is very less. Or have I got it wrong?
Okay. So I hope I've understood your question well, but this is also something that I have answered before. And so basically, this is a hypothetical situation where we are trying to prepare ourselves for the worst case scenario that the infection actually reaches that state that we'll need to start testing even asymptomatic people. I would definitely agree with the audience that says that we might have a lack of kits, not only because of the current inventory, but also mainly because of the supply chain that's being affected due to major travel bans. So if you look at the vendors who supply these kits and world-renowned vendors, most of them are either situated out of Europe or out of China. So the supply chain and the logistics that is there would have taken a hit. So it would be an uphill battle to get even more kits than we already have. And there would be a trickling of kits. So I would agree with the fact that maybe we'll fall short of kits. But most of the reason that we need to judiciously test only the ones that actually fit the criteria of the current stage of the pandemic and not test everyone.
Okay, all right. And can you give us a sense of what is like India's indigenous capacity to make these tests and ventilators, and what is it like? Is it entirely dependent on, say, China and other places, or is there some local capacity also?
So there is huge amounts of local capacity, but like what I mentioned to you, it would depend on what the government or NIV Pune regulates and authorizes, because the strain of the virus is such that we need to have uniform reporting in every lab, may it be Kashmir or Kanyakumari. Also, another point that I would like to make here, and a lot of people are making comparisons with South Korea testing regimes also, is that there is a particular rapid test. Now, this rapid test tests you for the particular antibody and not for the viral load. So I know it might be a little difficult for you to understand, so I'm going to break it up in very simple terms. So antibodies are basically proteins that are formed in the body when you're exposed to any particular infection, bacteria or a virus or any infection. And the viral load is the count of the virus's RNA, that is the genetic material of the virus, in your blood or your body. So the rapid testing kit that people are saying that can be done hugely and has been done in other countries as well would indicate herd immunity. Now, also for our listeners to understand what is herd immunity. Herd immunity is basically the same antibodies that I was just explaining to you that develop when you are exposed to any particular infection or you get a vaccine of. So, for example, I'll explain it with reference to swine flu. So when swine flu started and it was called a pandemic and there were a lot of people getting infected by it, and slowly we've seen now that it comes on a yearly basis and a very small number of people get affected. Why is that? That is only because of herd immunity that has developed in the population by people developing the antibodies. Now, the rapid testing kit that gives results in a few minutes and costs a few hundred rupees basically tests you for the antibodies. For India to start that rapid testing kit would not be appropriate right now, because currently we are trying to identify people who actually will develop symptoms and will get into that critical state so we can handle them and give them treatment.
How long do these antibodies, how long does this take? I mean, is it a few months process or does this actually take years?
No, it will take many months to go away. So the antibody rapid testing kit is not relevant here. And I want everyone to understand that, because in a few days, in a few weeks, I do hope that the private labs will start testing. And to go for the RT-PCR test, that is polymerase chain reaction test, that tells you the viral load, is the most appropriate one in these cases.
Okay. Manisha, you have anything?
I just had two questions, quick ones.
Yes.
One is following up on your herd immunity thing.
Yes.
I've been reading a lot about it, and a lot of doctors seem to believe that you are going to get the corona. It's just a question of when. And what we have to do now is just postpone it. So do you see it also like that? And the second question... Please go ahead.
So you have a relevant point here. Now everyone, not everyone, but a large majority will be exposed to the virus. Like you've already read and you understand that it does not affect healthy people in the age group up till maybe 50 or 60. So the main danger here is, even me being a doctor, I can tell you that every day when I go home, I have my grandfather who's in his 90s, and I don't meet him until I go to my room, I shower, I go down with a mask. He asks me every day, why are you wearing a mask? Because it's just that the transfer or the transmission of the virus to someone elderly in that age group can be disastrous for them. A lot of people in India and Delhi would have already had the infection, had a mild fever, got over it. But that doesn't mean that we can be careless, because we have to be careful for all the elderly people around us so that we don't give them the infection and they can have major consequences.
In the process of developing this herd immunity, are we just going to lose a lot of lives? Is it going to be unlike any other pandemic earlier? For example, swine flu. I'm just wondering if we're just going to lose a lot of people, and if the death rate is going to be far more than any other pandemic in this case, for us to even rely on herd immunity as, the final sort of way to...
Sure. So let me just give a fair comparison with the Spanish flu that you've also been discussing in the podcast. Now, at the time of Spanish flu in 1918, there were close to 35 million deaths. And at that time, there were two major differences, one in our favor and one against us. The one in our favor right now is that obviously after 100 years, we have a lot of developed medicines and science and testing capacities and knowledge. But on the other hand, if you actually look at it, the number of air travel or the number of flights in 1918 compared to now were comparatively zilch. So since this is an imported disease, for it to spread over the world, it has a much higher probability now compared to 100 years back. But yes, mortality, again coming to your question, is going to be concentrated in the elderly and the immunocompromised, like all of us already know. But to comment on an exact number would be difficult. But compared to the MERS and the SARS, now these were two earlier pandemics that we've seen. SARS had a fatality rate of close to 10%. MERS was around, I think, 6%. And now this would be around 2 to 3%. So it has a low fatality rate, but a much higher speed of transmission. What we call is how contagious it is. So a simple cough or a simple sneeze and a simple shake of the hands or opening a particular doorknob can get it transmitted to the next person.
Thanks, Doctor.
Could I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Please.
I just wanted to get a sense from you of, do you think we'll even know, what are will we ever find out how many people actually do have coronavirus in India? I ask this because we all know 1.5 million people, I think, around the world die of tuberculosis, for example. A third of those are Indians. Would we know people will die of tuberculosis, they'll die of something else? We might not ever test them for coronavirus.
No, with ample amount of knowledge of the particular pandemic and testing capacities and knowledge, and with the WHO and CDC and even the Ministry of Health looking at it very closely, I am sure in the next few months and years to come, the very specific symptoms that it actually has, especially when it reaches the shortness of breath and actually pneumonia that it causes, we will have COVID-19 in the top differential diagnosis in any good tertiary care center in Delhi. So the rate of detection will be good. But then again, on the flip side, the symptoms do overlap with the common flu. So we should have COVID-19 in the top differential, especially someone who develops any shortness of breath or pneumonia-like symptoms.
Right.
Thanks.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Doc. Any recommendation for our listeners before you say bye?
Yes. So basically, I saw this documentary on Netflix a few days back. It's called Pandemic. So it basically explains to the people watching how it is for the healthcare workers and also for the patients during a pandemic, and about the Spanish flu, about the H1N1 flu, about smaller cities and metropolitan cities, etc. So it would be a good watch if you have a time. It's a long season with many episodes. I've seen a few and I thought it was relevant for our viewers to watch and comment.
Right. Thanks so much. Good luck with tackling this, and thank you for your service and what you do.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being on the podcast, guys. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was really insightful and very helpful.
Yep. Now, moving on with the politics of it.
Modi ji.
Now, Modi ji's address yesterday. Now, let me just put out the context for those of our overseas listeners who may not have seen the full half an hour speech of his. Modi ji came for half an hour yesterday, and I guess the whole country was glued onto it, and basically said that this is serious. People stay indoors, avoid contact. And Sunday he has called for a voluntary Janta curfew. It is not an enforced curfew, but he's requested everybody to stay indoors, and in the evening at 5 o'clock come to the balconies and clap. People have compared it with, Kerala's chief minister putting out that they've put about 20,000 crore. This is what they've done. Specifics of how they're doing to tackle it. Some have compared it with Justin Trudeau's address, which was, I think, about 5-10 minute address. So, of course, the Modi haters will say nothing Modi does is right. People like Vivek Agnihotri have tweeted that Modi ji is the best person in the world to manage a disaster. So I guess the truth lies somewhere between. So first, let me ask Suhasini and then the rest of the panel, what do you think of that address yesterday? Would you rank from a 0 to 10? Where would you rank it? And what should he have said beyond what he did, or should he have not said certain things? So everybody saw Mr. Modi's address, and people have reacted depending on where you are on the I love Modi or I hate Modi spectrum. And it has been compared to many other addresses around the world. So Hasni, how would you rate it? What could he have said more and what should he have not said?
Okay, so Abhinandan, I have to say, firstly, Mr. Modi gave everyone a 24-hour time lag in between the time that he announced it and the time that he actually had the speech. I think this was a big mistake because it clearly led to a lot of panic in the country. People expecting that at 8 p.m. announcement by Prime Minister Modi will mean something is going to be shut down, something could be closed down, shops might be shut. So you saw panic buying in cities across the country. You saw people stocking up on fuel. You saw medicines, pharmacies, groceries just go empty in a matter of a few hours. So I do think that the Prime Minister's media handlers need to consider this particular time, at a time when everyone's so nervous and jumpy. Maybe what you just need to do is ease in people and say, it's like the Man Ki Baat, that the Prime Minister is going to speak in his normal way that he does. I also think that how you grade what Mr. Modi said really depends on what you were expecting from the speech. I think you did get that assurance, if that's what you were looking for, that the Prime Minister feels that this is a pandemic that's being taken seriously by the government, but it isn't something that the government is overwhelmed by. However, if you were expecting him to lay out specific details on what the government's doing, where they think the actual pandemic has reached in India, whether it's a local transmission, what it is about a community transmission, that should really worry us, or whether you were expecting him to make specific, give specific government programs, I think you might have been disappointed. What I saw from a lot of the reaction to the Prime Minister's speech is people, sort of being very positive about what he said in terms of keeping the older people indoors, speaking about being more compassionate in general, but in particular to people who work for you, give people time off if needed. So those were much needed things for him to say. The appreciation for healthcare workers, I think, is very important. And of course, we've seen in other countries like Spain and France and Italy, where people who are stuck inside their homes on complete lockdown, organized a sort of community applause, and everybody clapped at one particular time for them. Mr. Modi's plan for Sunday, which is to, everybody will clap hands or thali bajao or ghanti bajao at 5 p.m. Does seem a little symbolic. It does seem a little like tokenism. But I guess if the message goes through that we do appreciate health workers, emergency workers who are working at a time nobody else really wants to, then that is very important. All in all, I would say Mr. Modi lacked on substance in his speech. So I wouldn't give him any marks for that. But I would certainly say it was a very reassuring speech. And I think those who wanted to be reassured probably went away feeling that.
Manisha, you want to weigh in? I mean, I will say this is the first speech of Mr. Modi where I saw humility. Otherwise, no matter what he's announcing, there is a certain... He uses main very often. Even maine aise kiya, maine... He never says hum ya hamari sarkar. He refers to himself as...
Yeah, he did look jittery.
The prime, he's the alpha. I noticed he did not do any of that. There was a certain, मैं आपसे कुछ मांगने आया हूँ. There was that humility. He didn't seem like the guy. But I did think that the ghanta bajao, whatever, thali bajao, is a test to see to what extent we'll obey. But yeah, Manisha, what are your...
I think one of the main problems that I had with the speech was that we're just borrowing something from the Western world without seeing whether it applies to us or not. And this is the kind of stress that's being put on home quarantining and self-isolation. And I just want to read a few statistics from the census, which says that the average household size in India is a little below 5 members. Census data on size of dwelling units show that only 5% of Indian houses have 5 or more rooms, which means that 69% of Indian houses have only 1 or 2 rooms. And in Western countries, even the poorer households offer 1 room per person. And you don't need to read the census data for this also. If you just look at any of the juggies around you, communities share toilets. One room would house like 5 to 6 families, from elders to kids. So this home quarantine thing, I think it's just really like we are just not thinking about how it's going to work in India. I don't think it can work in India. What he should have done, I think there should have been more stress on sanitation. I think there should be massive sanitation drives, maybe even giving free disinfectants in communities and slum areas, or even rich people can buy it themselves. But I think there should have been just more stress on sanitation and some concrete measures on what is the state going to do. This is all what will you do for the state? But what is the state going to do? What is the economic package going to look like? I think it was nice that he said that, be nice to your domestic help or whatever and make sure you don't cut their wage. But what economic stimuli are you going to give? Or what are you thinking about in terms of an economic package? Or even with testing, I thought that maybe he'll say something about testing, where all you could test, or if you're going to involve the private labs in it. So I think, again, high on emotion and very fatherly speech, come, let's sing and join hands and do all that, but low on substance. I thought Justin Trudeau's speech was way more comforting, even though it won't affect me. I mean, at least that seemed like, there's a concrete plan that the country's coming up with to deal with whatever's happening.
Also, Trump putting aside $1 trillion as a stimuli package, to just make sure that the economy doesn't come to a grinding halt and people have some money to spend. And Boris Johnson said that, I keep saying Boris Yeltsin. Boris Johnson said that we request our businesses to stand by their employees because we will stand by the businesses.
Yeah.
Now,
like
in
there
India,
was no comfort.
Already, I know for a fact, many people I know have shut down certain businesses. Certain businesses that I'm aware of firsthand are already planning layoffs in the next 3 months. This is something I don't think our government even has a plan to address or the capacity to. I do think that today's Times of India is a very telling piece of what is to follow. Mehraj, you can come in after this. Sorry to come in. There is a 3-page ad of Yogi Adityanath, and he's been putting full-page ads every day.
He's also writing op-eds. He wrote 4 op-eds.
Yeah, so today there's 3-page ads. I think going forward, every news organization will only have government ads to survive because the private sector is fucked. They will not be able to support. And the first place where they cut down even before
Not every, Abhinandan. Remember, the government doesn't necessarily advertise in every newspaper.
That's true. Sorry. Yes. But I think that is, in my view, from the news point of view, very dangerous. And not just for the BJP. AAP has been payloading 3-page ads, if you remember, before the
elections, yes.
I mean, every day there was a half-page smiling Kejriwal greeting us from some page or the other. Sometimes it was a full page. I'm sure in other states it'll be likewise. In Bengal it'll be likewise. I think the danger to news ecosystem is pretty significant.
Yeah, with the private sector, if they shrink advertising, and they will. That's the first hit.
So the only people who will have an ad budget is the governments from around the country.
And then expect total obedience.
So therefore, again, I keep saying, unless the public pays, the public won't be served. But Mehraj, about the speech.
So I agree with Manisha completely. And this is not just about like people living in unsanitary conditions, they can't quarantine. What about people who have to go out work that day to eat? They can't eat unless they go out to work. And that's like 70-80% of the population in this country.
In fact, the Ola and Uber cab drivers have said, please do something, our EMIs, because they're not getting from making 1,000, 2,000 a day, they're making 200, 300 a day.
Exactly. Not just them, the factory workers, the rickshaw fellows, the ready-walas, the daily wage workers. What are they going to do? I mean, it's fine to say, okay, go and sit inside your home and clap at like monkeys at 5 o'clock. That's fine. But what about these people? I mean, the problem with this speech is, I mean, we have to disabuse ourselves of the notion that it was a speech, it was a address to the nation. It wasn't. It was an address to the top 10-15% of the country, the upper caste, upper class, upper middle class people who basically have all the privilege in this country. There are clues throughout. The only like practical suggestion he gave is don't go to the hospital if you have like routine checkups. Call up the family doctor. Are you kidding me? How many people in this country have family doctors?
Good point. He was clearly talking to us.
Don't give your maids and other people.
So he wasn't talking to the maid.
Don't cut their wages. What does that mean?
And
what is he going to do?
aapki daya dikha do.
Yes, what is he going to do if people actually cut their wages?
Which is going to happen.
The thing,
Also,
like you said,
Abhinandan, if I could add to Mehraj and what he's saying, even the idea of coming out on your balcony or your roof to clap hands really denotes a middle-class society. Obviously, you don't want a lot of people to come out on the roads and start clapping if the whole purpose of that day is social distancing.
yeah, and elective surgery. I mean, just that word. I mean, there was this story during the Delhi riots. This one person whose father was like injured. He took him to a hospital. Hospital did the basic treatment, then said take him to another hospital because if you admit him here, you'll have to pay $5,000. He didn't have $5,000. He was taking him to another hospital. He died on the way. And elective surgery you're talking about, and quarantine, which people are going to sit at home? The displaced people in Delhi who were displaced by the violence, where are they going to go? So this was, I mean, I actually watched the speech yesterday and then I thought maybe I missed something because I didn't hear any concrete proposals. Even like clowns such as Donald Trump and Boris Johnson are coming out with concrete solutions right now. I mean, if the leader comes out right now, he has to say, this is the section of society who won't be getting their wages, let's do this thing for them. These are the people who won't be getting their rations, let's do this thing for them. These are the people living in very vulnerable conditions, let's do this thing for them. Instead of it, it's like, you remember, the vibe I got was, either it's like a Nero fiddling while Rome burned and he's asking all of Rome to just cheer him on as he does it. And there's this whole idea about, okay, I'm asking you for this, I'm asking you for this. You remember those 80s, 90s B-grade Hindi movies? There's this generic Thakur ji ka character, Thakur Sahab, and he says, "Gaon walo, aapne meri har baat mani hai aaj tak. Ab main aakhri qurbani chahta hu aapse." What the hell, man?
The one good thing though here is that at least in terms of concrete measure, at least the Yogi Adityanath government said that the government will be paying daily wage labor.
Good.
For
and
the money that they lose. So at least that's a concrete thing
Those
that
are the
we
things.
will pay. We
yeah,
will
like
step in.
Kerala is doing. I mean, and let's hope and pray to God that this doesn't come to that. But even what Kerala is proposing now, if all the models work out the way they're saying, and if we follow the examples of other countries, even that is going to be so little. It's not going to be enough. What even Kerala is doing, they're basically paying 55% of the population. And here this guy is saying, okay, let's clap.
Right. So now one thing that I had predicted yesterday was that Yogi Adityanath, Ajay Singh Bisht will have to cancel the Ayodhya Mela because he can't go ahead with that without making Modi look silly. And that has happened this morning. I think Modi would not want to announce that because it would hit his popularity. Now, how some Indians have behaved irresponsibly. In Kolkata, there was this IS officer's son who landed, partied.
From Oxford.
Came here,
Oxford
partied
returned.
again. And could possibly have infected a bunch of people. His mother, who's an IS officer, attended office, so they were distant. And Mamata Banerjee is justifiably livid. Then in Maharashtra, some people who had that stamp of home quarantine boarded a train and decided to head off.
And there's one recent case coming out from Lucknow where this singer Kanika Kapoor, she came back from United Kingdom. She hid her travel history from authorities. She stayed at a 5-star and attended a party with 100 people.
And
she's tested positive.
She's tested positive.
This hiding travel histories is happening all over. We actually have a report coming out today. We spoke to a lot of health officials who are on the ground going to screen people and test people. And they're saying we go to somebody's house, we know they have come from abroad, and we go and they either say, the family will say they're not here, and we call them and they'll say we're out of city, or like they'll say we never left the city, and then they have to dig up their phone records to show that you actually were outside.
My God,
that's like really bad. In Kerala, I mean, despite all the great things they are doing, I mean, despite all the civic consciousness they have, they had to file criminal cases against 3 people because they're being idiots like this.
I think it's a very typical Desi attitude. Now, one thing that I'm kind of on the fence on, actually I'm not on the fence, I actually don't think there's anything wrong with it. And I know Sonia Verma, NDTV managing editor, had tweeted that how can you stamp people on the hand for home quarantine? And some people had said that this is equivalent to, the Star of David that happened. It triggers that kind of stuff.
Oh, please.
I think there's nothing wrong because you have to have some separator. Like, are you saying Jews don't go to nightclubs? Because at least when I was young in Delhi, I mean, when I used to go to nightclubs, I don't know if they still do that. I haven't been to one in like 15, 20 years. But you stamp your wrist.
Stamped, yeah.
So are you saying people don't go to nightclubs because it triggers something? I mean, isn't this...
And what do you do? I mean, you have to
even
come
in
up with
hospitals, they put those bands around your
they put
wrists.
your
So
bands
they
around.
do. So what's wrong with that? So Hasini, is this like needless outrage over like anything? Like, are we again being over woke, which is a problem of the 2020s?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that in a situation like this, you better have to tell people that if they are being stamped, they do know that they're not entitled to behave exactly as they please. Remember, people are not being let back into the country at all. And Indians are, one Indian died in Iran. There are 254 cases just in that area in Iran, near Qom, of Indian coronavirus affected people. They're not being allowed into the country simply because they already have tested positive for it. Now, there are so many people who are coming in who may even test negative today, but in a week from now will have shown the symptoms and they would already be infected. So to minimize the threat from that by saying, oh, I don't want a stamp on my hand, I think that is a bit much. I do think what we need, though, Abhinandan, I would say, it's just a bit of empathy. You know, we've been doing stories for the last couple of weeks about people who, are for some reason slipping through the cracks or are not being helped. I remember when people in the airports got angry because they were spending 4 or 5 hours, waiting for a coronavirus test, and yet, we're obviously in very jammed areas. You saw those pictures of the terminal where there are queues and queues and people in close proximity. There must have been people without masks, people who were coughing. It was an uncomfortable place to be. And, the moment those videos came out, the way they were slammed and everybody said, oh, this is the privilege of India showing its privileges. Clearly, there is obviously some amount of empathy that we all need. Just put yourself in another person's shoes. When people ran away from quarantine centers, I don't think that is correct. But some of them talked about really, really bad conditions where they were being kept.
I saw some of the photographs.
Manisha just spoke about the need for having your own room. They were sharing rooms, they were sharing bathrooms, food and water wasn't necessarily in the best thing. There have been good examples and bad examples. Obviously, we've seen some great examples of quarantine as well. Besides that, I mean, we've been seeing the reaction to some, if you say pilgrims in Iran are stuck and can't come back to India and don't know how to survive. And at the beginning, they were actually not being helped either by the Iranian government or by the Indian embassy. The average reaction was, well, what do they mean by going for a pilgrimage at this time? Obviously, they didn't know that they were going in to risk, people, OCIs who are stuck outside or Indians who are traveling abroad, it'll be like, oh, they can afford to go to a hotel. Well, maybe they can't. Maybe the student who's been thrown out of his college was living on a full scholarship and now really cannot survive while they're outside. So all I'm saying is we understand everyone is going through a certain amount of hardship. We do need a little more empathy for each other.
The one thing scary with this India not allowing students and Indian nationals to come back is, so how long is it going to go on for, say, till the end of March? If shit hits the roof in UK, they're not going to care. Like, their health officials would find our people there a burden. So I think this could be very scary for Indians there also, because they would want you to go back. Your country doesn't want to take you back. So it can create a lot of panic. I mean, I would be terrified.
Yeah, exactly. In countries which are like really
Manisha,
burdened
I
right
don't
now.
know if you saw that video, but there was a video by an Indian business traveler who was stuck in Manila. And he said when he went to the airport and said to them, listen, I just want to go home. The officer apparently said to him, sir, this is not our fault. It seems your country doesn't want you.
Yes, I saw that.
So we do have to, obviously desperate times ask for desperate measures, but you're absolutely right.
I think this is where triage comes in and one realizes that it seems heartless, but now everyone has to take that call, and we're seeing it in the sense that I remember Samir had told me once from ORF. He says, when a world leader takes a decision of saying that, no, we will not put our carbon emission at cuts at X, we will put it as like 15% less. He has pretty much signed a death warrant for about 100,000 people, because that will lead to 100,000 deaths because of exposure. But you haven't done it directly that I want those 100,000 killed. But certain decisions you take kill people. Doctors do that. That's the whole concept of triage at, mobile surgical hospitals. That the person who has the most chance of surviving, they'll operate on him and they'll let the other guy die. Because you have limited... Now, it's not fair, but I think that is a reality that people who are taking tough decisions are faced with every day. And now we just get to see those decisions.
No, but what I worry is, unfortunately, I don't think this is, like, from all indications, it doesn't look like it's a coherent policy. They're just doing this on the fly. Even in Modi's speech, if you remember, the only thing he said the government will do, other than everything he asked people only to do, was that they have set up a committee, COVID response team under the finance minister, central.
Oh, right.
And everybody who has even passing familiarity with India will know that if you don't want to do anything, you set up a committee.
Right.
And I was just reading in the morning newspaper that they are asking for stakeholders, usual those terms, stakeholders for responses and feedback and everything. I mean, right now you should be on a war footing, trying to figure out how to bring these people back, why to take them. I mean, people in Italy and Iran, they're not going to get, I don't think they'll get healthcare there.
Right, sure.
They're not going to go to the hospital. What is the plan?
Yeah.
You're shutting down the borders for a week. What after that? Is there a plan?
Well,
and they're not telling the people what
I think
is to be done.
This is something that the US has cracked. No matter what the situation, they have daily briefings. Even if it's a murder, the local police that we have found is you won't have people, going into the space and hame ye mila, wo mila. In fact, during that entire Tahir Hussain Delhi riots case, like there were reporters going in and handling stuff. See, we found this. Like, dude, if you found this, like, what are the cops doing? It's all lying around there for you guys to find. But before we let Suhasini go, I was hoping that something like this would make news, at least, non-partisan on this issue. But I was dismayed to see certain channels have said, Pakistan marega corona ki maut. Although the numbers are there pretty alarming in Pakistan. They're rising fast.
And the
more
same
than
problem.
450 cases.
Same South Asian problem there also, where people are not adhering to the authorities. They're going around holding parties.
So I saw this.
447 is the number there.
I saw this video yesterday from Bangladesh. I think it's genuine because people have said it's genuine. 10,000 people congregating to pray.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's a disaster. But in all fairness, in a lot of places in India, at least, that has stopped.
Tirupati has shut. ISKCON is shut. Most big mosques.
But I think, Abhinandan, you make an important point. We really do have to move on from the partisanship, because I think coronavirus, it may be just like any other pandemic. People have spoken of the Spanish flu. They've spoken of all kinds of other cases. After all, we no longer fear H5N1 or H1N1 the way we used to just a few years ago. So maybe coronavirus will also be controlled. But its damage around the world is there for everyone to see. The economies, the fact that flights have got shut means what? That the airline industries are going to be in trouble. Hotel industries are going to be in trouble. As you pointed out, small businesses in India, businesses that were already reeling from demonetization, GST, economic issues. So I think we do have to understand that what we're looking at is that even the recovery from corona is going to be very hard all around the world. It would be a great thing, let's put it that way. It would be a great thing if our leaders decided not to make this partisan, not to make this political. As I said, the idea that Trump would put into an ad campaign, that he was calling it the Chinese virus, but where were the Democrats? That kind of thing is all too familiar for us, where we see everybody being made into, anti-nationals if they don't toe the government, and those who want to criticize the government make it all about the politics. So I do think we need a lot less of that. Maybe, the virus has come, maybe I'm being overdramatic, but it's quite possible the virus has come at a time when polarization is at such a height that people need to take the time they have to stay at home, work from home, slow down and think about what they've been saying and doing all this time.
I think Suhasini made an important point. I mean, as far as we know, the only way to stop the spread, contain the spread, is social distancing. That is not going to happen unless you tell everybody transparently, you have to go out to work, don't go out to work, we'll give you this much money, or we'll
Specifics
make these
have to be
arrangements.
there.
Yes,
It can't be
everybody.
generalities.
Every single person, I mean, every single class of person, that this is going to happen. If you have you are an Uber driver, you have a car, we'll put a moratorium on EMIs for now.
Right.
We'll figure out some other way later. Let's do this in the meantime.
I think
that has not happened. Nothing is happening like that.
Specialize in generalities.
सुन लिया अफ्रीका मुफत खोरों. Not to brag or anything, but Newslaundry Hafta features in the top 50 in the world on SoundCloud in the news and politics category for podcasts. So do subscribe and see what you're missing, because when the public pays, the public is served. When advertisers pay, advertisers are served. Subscribe, help keep news independent and free.
All Newslaundry podcasts are available on iTunes and Stitcher and any other podcast platform.